When you think of a Saber, what comes to mind? Well, we can start with, they use swords. That one's obvious, isn't it? Another thing is probably the fact that they've got a noble, dignified personality too. Now that makes sense, since they're literally part of the knight classes. If you're thinking what else and can't come up with anything, well, I think because that's probably it. They usually take the spotlight in the main story and are often portrayed as the face of justice, pure, righteous, and all that good stuff. That's the surface image of the Saber class, the most iconic class in the Fate series. People often say it's the strongest among the original 7. Well, sometimes. But here's the thing. Even though this class looks super straightforward on the surface, the truth is, just like any other class, there are actually some Saber concepts that are kinda unusual compared to the usual ones. You'd think this class is all clean-cut with no room for gimmicks, right? But turns out the devs found ways to have fun with it. And honestly, you might not have even noticed it. That's what we're diving into today. I'll show you that the class that seems the most basic in the series actually has some surprisingly weird stuff going on too. If you've been following my channel for a while, you might remember I've already covered other classes: Lancer, Archer, Rider, and so on. I think Saber's the only one from the original 7 I haven't touched yet. This is honestly because I felt like there wasn't much to tackle from this class. You see, like I said earlier, this class looks simple. Technically, the requirement is that the heroic spirit needs to have legends about being a Knight of the Sword. It's also the class with the highest overall stats, except for magic. Basically, the whole idea here is they're so damn good with a sword, they don't really need magic, just steel, skill, and pure determination. Okay, maybe not exactly like that, but you get the point. This class is all about discipline and unshakable resolve. From the devs' perspective, it makes sense. They want the Saber class to stand out for its swordsmanship, not for the magic aspect. Sword fighting is a human skill, something anyone can train with enough time and effort. And that fits perfectly with the whole knight image: strict, disciplined, and all about hard work. So by lowering the focus on magic, they're shining a spotlight on just how skilled these characters are with the blade. Now normally, this is the part where I'd talk about the general visual style of the class I'm covering. But honestly, I think we already have a super clear image of what a typical Saber looks like. In the original Fate series, the most iconic Saber, Saber Artoria, aka King Arthur, had crazy sword skills and wielded a legendary sword. And that's it. That was the blueprint. Simple, clean, no confusion. As long as you had that knightly vibe and fought with a sword, then you're a Saber. You didn't need to overthink it. The class was designed in a way that even the audience could easily tell. At least that's how I see it. So, yeah. Since we all already have a pretty solid image of what a Saber looks like, let's get into what I actually want to talk about. How the most basic and plain class actually got pretty chaotic over time. Well, not chaotic exactly, but you get what I mean. As the story kept growing, a class that started out as just knights who swing swords obviously needed some updates. And honestly, it's not even that surprising when you think about it. Swords are everywhere in Fate. Like, so many non-Sabers use swords too. So naturally, the devs had to find new ways to keep the Saber class fresh and interesting. One of the funniest things they ended up doing was accidentally turning the whole sword beam thing into a running joke. If you didn't know, the sword beam joke started with Saber Artoria and her iconic Noble Phantasm, a big, flashy energy blast from her sword, basically a giant slash that looks like a laser beam. But then more and more Sabers started getting beam-like attacks in their Noble Phantasms too. It probably started because the author wanted to show how legendary and powerful a final sword strike could be. So powerful it looks like a beam. But the funny part is, it kinda turned into a trend. Like, at some point, it felt like every Saber had to have a beam attack. And yeah, while the intention was probably to show how insanely strong their slashes were, to the audience, it just started looking like everyone was shooting laser swords instead. Eventually, it got so ridiculous that Fate Guda Guda episodes straight up made fun of it. They had an episode where the joke was, sabers who can't shoot beams aren't real sabers. And honestly, that was hilarious. They even had Artoria in the sketch saying that during Saber job interviews, you have to say what kind of beam you can shoot and what color it is. And poor Okita, who doesn't have a sword beam, got roasted the whole time, like she only got into the Saber class through the back door or something. Yeah, you can tell the devs were just clowning at that point, and it was glorious. They weren't afraid to mess around with the typical Saber noble phantasm style, and it actually worked. It became a fun little twist that fans really enjoyed. Now, every time a new Saber shows up, there's always that one question in the back of everyone's mind. Are we getting another sword beam, or is it going to be something different this time? The memes just kept coming, and that plain, straightforward image of the Saber class suddenly had this fun, semi-serious twist to it. Now remember, that was a trending conversation from a few years back, maybe more like the early days actually. And that was just one of the things the devs did to keep the Saber concept fresh. Of course, there's more, because the devs have definitely been tweaking and experimenting with the class to make sure it stays interesting. Another thing I really love about how the Saber concept has changed over time is how they started tweaking the whole noble knight vibe that's usually stuck so tightly to the class. I think it's super interesting because instead of messing with the sword aspect, they played around with the knight personality. I guess I'll just show you. It'll be easier to understand that way. When you look at characters like Artoria, Gawain, Siegfried, or even Grandpa Yagyu, you can clearly feel that dignified aura they all carry. Then suddenly, we get to see Saber Musashi Miyamoto, and her arrival was seriously a breath of fresh air for the class. Why? Because she's probably the only Saber with the noble presence of a wet tissue, but somehow still honorable, and that makes her so relatable. Don't get me wrong, she still has the heart of a samurai and carries that knight-like spirit, but she mixes it with all these flaws, like how carefree she is about life. And that's exactly what made her one of the most beloved characters in the series, including by me. Lore-wise, she's not that special, aside from dimension hopping, but from her personality, she is super refreshing compared to the usual stiff Sabers. Sure, you could argue that some of the summer Sabers have that same relaxed vibe, but Musashi pulls it off as a regular Saber. No special event, no gimmicks, just her being her. And because of that, I feel like she ended up being one of the weirder Sabers in a class that's usually so simple and straightforward. After all that tweaking with the knight-like personality of Sabers, now let's move on to the ones with weird lore concepts. And honestly, I doubt anyone doesn't know this guy. You already know who I'm talking about. Senji Muramasa and how bizarre his role as a Saber is. Like I said earlier, Sabers are supposed to be heroic spirits known for their swordsmanship. Keyword, swordsmanship. But Muramasa is totally different. The guy never even fought with a sword in his actual life. He made them. He was a swordsmith, not a swordsman. If anything, his concept feels way more like a caster than a Saber. But for some reason he's here, classified as a Saber. Muramasa became famous because the swords he forged were said to be powerful and cursed. A lot of the dark stories around his blades actually came from Tokugawa Ieyasu's legend, who was super paranoid because so many of his allies got wounded or killed by Muramasa swords. Ieyasu himself even got injured by one, so he started spreading those evil swordsmith rumors out of spite. Now, despite being labeled a Saber, Muramasa himself points out that he's not a warrior and kinda hates being in this class. But if you actually look at his actions, he's insanely skilled. He can literally cut through causality itself, regardless of what sword he's using. He goes toe-to-toe with Lancer Purgatorio and honestly could have ended the fight easily if it weren't for the Curse of Annihilation. Even Musashi comments on this, like, yeah, he swings his sword like an old man with a cane, but the speed and power behind those swings are ridiculous. Now, after hearing all that and realizing how weird the connection is between his legend and his powers, I feel like there might actually be a real-life reason why Muramasa's sword swings are so insanely strong. Now, from the perspective of a swordsmith, I've heard that a lot of real-life swordsmiths in Japan actually had pretty decent sword skills too. Some were trained in specific styles, or practiced tamaeshigiri, or test cutting, which requires a lot of precision. Or maybe Muramasa's insane sword swings come from years of forging blades. Swinging all that metal probably worked as unintentional training. Like, without realizing it, he was training his body to swing swords like a beast. Or maybe it's also because of Shiro. I mean, he's basically using Shiro's body, which was in peak condition at that point. Whatever the reason is, it's definitely interesting. Okay, so earlier we talked about a Saber with barely any noble presence. And yet she still ended up being one of the most beloved characters in the class. Then we had another Saber whose legend has nothing to do with swordsmanship, which basically goes against the whole point of the class. Those were already weird. But I think the title for the weirdest Saber still goes to the one that doesn't even use a sword. And no, I'm not talking about knives or any other bladed weapons. I'm talking about fists. Yeah, Saber Santa Carna. Now I know what you're thinking. Obviously, this is a special servant made for a limited Christmas event. And yeah, even lore-wise, this whole thing is already kinda out there. But still, this was the devs' attempt to once again mess with the super basic Saber class and make it feel fresh, so we gotta count this in. Santa Carna is a Saber who uses his fists as his sword. If you ask him why he qualifies for the class, he'll tell you it's because his punches are so fast they look like slashes. And, well, aside from that explanation, there's not much else. Actually, no, there is another explanation. The real reason behind this idea probably came from a pun. I'm serious. I've talked about this 2 or 3 times before, and every time I bring it up, I still can't believe the devs actually went with this. See, the Japanese kanji for sword is pronounced ken. And guess what? The kanji for fist is also pronounced ken. Totally different kanji, but the exact same reading. So technically, if you're punching someone, it can still sound like you're fighting with a sword. Well, at least in this case. It's dumb, yes, but it works, and it's hilarious. His whole boxing theme might have also come from Boxing Day, which is the day after Christmas. Normally it's about opening gifts, but for Carna it's about throwing hands. Even his outfit joins in on the pun game. There's a word sun and a square on his jacket, which in Japanese can be read as Santa. And his noble phantasm is called Graharja Santa Cross, which sounds almost exactly like Santa Claus in Japanese. I swear, whoever designed him is a genius. So yeah, he's probably the Saber who breaks the mold the most, a Saber with no sword, and honestly, I love it. It's peak chaos and creativity. But now that I think about it, technically, this whole punch Saber idea might have started earlier, with Bedivere. Yes, Bedivere uses a sword and fights like a proper knight. But lore-wise, the reason he's in the throne of heroes and the nature of his noble phantasm is literally tied to his arm. He has a stone arm made with Excalibur inside it. So his strongest attack is literally just a punch with Excalibur power, which is kinda wild. Still, Betty's presence in FGO doesn't feel that big, probably because he's hard to summon. People always say he's a 3-star servant with 4-star power, but his summon rate feels like a 5-star. No wonder he gets overlooked. Anyway, with Santa Carna and Bedivere, Sabers without bladed weapons, I think it's safe to say the devs are still willing to surprise us with new, wacky Saber concepts. And honestly, I hope they keep doing it. So, what do you guys think? Hit that subscribe button and I'll see you next time.